I've built lots and lots of Bubble apps and have thousands of hours within Bubble. And along the way, I've made a lot of mistakes. These are the biggest mistakes that you will make that will cost you the most time and money. Some of these mistakes are mistakes that I've made myself, and some of them are ones that I've picked up along the way. But learning them sooner rather than later is going to save you a lot of pain and a lot of potential money. By the way, my name's Matt. I've been a developer since 2017. I've got a load of experience in Bubble, both building my own products as well as building software for clients. So let's get into it. Number one is not planning properly. Yes, it's a bit of a boring one, but it's super important. The great thing about Bubble is it's relatively quick and easy to jump in and build whatever it is that you want to build, but that doesn't mean that you should jump straight into it. I cannot count the number of times that I've failed to plan properly and I've started a project, and by the time I'm 50 hours into it, I see that I need to rebuild the database structure, or I need to basically start again for some reason. I don't do it that much anymore, and I'm much more disciplined about planning it, but the urge is definitely still there to jump straight in. So when you plan out your Bubble project, there are three main steps to it. First, you want to make sure that you can actually do what you want to do within Bubble. It's very versatile, but it cannot build absolutely everything, so you need to check that. Then secondly, once you know that it's possible, you should wireframe it. This is basically creating a sketch for what pages you want to have and roughly what it's going to look like. It doesn't need to be fancy, just which buttons are going to be where on which pages, roughly how does the user move through the app, and so on. Figma is a really great free tool for this. And then lastly, you want to plan your database structure. This requires a bit of knowledge about data types and database, but it's important that you do the research. You want to know exactly what data types you want, what properties each data type should have. You want to know if you're going to use a data type for this or if you're going to use an option set. Just some examples. But database structuring can be tricky and you won't get it right straight away, and you will have to tweak some stuff, as you go forward. It's barely ever do I create a project where the database is spot on from the very first iteration. It is, an iterative process. But not planning out the database properly is definitely going to come back to bite you. Number two, bit of a technical one, but it's one that can cost you thousands of dollars if you get wrong. You want to avoid endless backend API loops. This is where you have a backend workflow that calls itself, or perhaps another workflow that then calls the original one to create a loop. This loop just keeps looping and looping and looping and never stops if you build it incorrectly. The thing about Bubble is that for every server-side function that you run, you pay in workflow units or workload units even. So if you accidentally set off one of these infinite loops, you're going to have a massive bill because it's just going to keep on looping and it's never going to stop. It's never happened to me, thankfully, but from people that it has happened to, I've heard that Bubble just take it straight from your bank account just like that, and there's no warning. It's just $3,000 gone potentially. So here are three things you can do to prevent that. Firstly, you want to have a limit on all recursive workflows. I like to create a counter or a stepper property that I +1 to every time the loop runs, and then every time I check to see if this counter's under 1,000 or 500 or whatever you want the limit to be. It's not a super elegant solution, but if you're a beginner, it's a great solution to use. And it's just belts and braces. It really makes sure that you never go over 1,000 iterations, and most processes don't need over 1,000 iterations. The next is you want to go into the settings, go to app plan, and then make sure that you can see that overages are disabled. Every month you have an amount of workload units you can use, and when this setting is turned on, it means that you can reach your limit and you will not automatically be billed for more. It does mean that when you reach your limit, your app will come offline, but that's much better than potentially being billed hundreds or thousands of dollars. If you know what you're doing, then you can turn this on, but especially if you're just starting out, remember to turn on that setting where it says overages are disabled. And the last way, which is really belts and braces, is to pay for your Bubble account on a credit card. So if you do get charged, then you can just dispute it with your credit card company and it should rule in your favor. The number three mistake is when you're building some functionality, you want to make sure what plugins are available. When I was new to Bubble, there were several times that I spent a lot of time building some nice functionality that I was really proud of, just to look on the plugin marketplace and see that there was a much better version that I could have installed for free and would have got it working within 3 clicks. If you can use a plugin to do something, then great. It means it can save you time. You do want to be a little bit careful that you're not having hundreds of plugins, but usually that's not the case. There are some plugins which I do pay for, even if I could build their functionality, just because it just saves me a huge amount of time compared to building it out myself. The number four mistake, one of the biggest mistakes, is not knowing whether you're going to use Bubble's backend or if you're going to host your backend elsewhere when you start your project. Bubble's backend is fine, especially in the beginning, but it should be a conscious thought whether you use Bubble's backend or another backend. Numerous times I've had to migrate apps that outgrow Bubble's backend to something over like Xano or Supabase. This does take a lot of time and therefore money. If you consider the question of where you want your backend before you build your project, you can make changes that will save you a lot of time later down the line, even if you don't go with that option to begin with. For example, you can make sure that all of your users are signed up over on Xano, let's say, or whatever you want to use, so that when you migrate, you don't have to migrate the authentication data or the payment data, which is usually the worst part. So to reiterate that last point, it's not bad to use Bubble's backend, but it should be a choice, not just a given. Otherwise, it can cause big headaches when you find out you have to migrate later on. Number 5, this one is a bit more on the business side if you're building a SaaS, and that is to make sure that you have validated your idea as much as you can before you build it. I have fallen foul of this one in the past, and it's a very painful and very expensive mistake to make. You want to know that before you put hundreds of hours into building a project or paying someone else to build it, that it's actually going to be used by people and people are actually going to pay for it. So many times I see people get caught up in a business idea and they get really excited and they just want to build it, but you need to validate your idea if you want to save yourself potentially a lot of pain in the future. There's several ways that you can do this. A great one to begin with is create a landing page where it just explains what your SaaS is, what it does, what problems it solves, and add a form where people can join a waiting list. If you really want to make sure that people like what you build, then you can put a special, special offer to begin with, where people have to pay in order to be on that waiting list. If you've got a really great idea, people will do this, and especially if it's a small ticket, just so people are deciding with their wallets rather than with their brains, because they're two different decisions. Whether someone says, "Yeah, I really like it," and then if someone's actually prepared to pay for it. Another way is you can see if there are similar products already out there doing scale. This won't tell you for sure, but if there's someone else out there doing something similar to you, then it probably means that there's a market for it. And likewise, if you see no one else doing it, it might mean that you've got a great idea, but more of the time it means that actually no one wants it. And the third one is try to speak to as many potential buyers as possible and see what problems they have, how they currently solve them, how important solving the problem is to them. A really, really good book to read on this topic, if you're creating a SaaS and you haven't read it already, is The Mum Test. Just absolutely crucial to read it if you are creating a SaaS. So there we have it. Those are my top Bubble mistakes to avoid when creating an app or a SaaS within Bubble. We have not planning properly, not triggering endless back-end workflows in a loop. 3, not wasting your time building something that you could just do with a plugin. Number 4, make sure that you have your backend in the right place before jumping in with development, or at least knowing where you're going to have it in the long term. And number 5, make sure that you validate your idea if you're building a SaaS. Now, of course, there are a load more mistakes that you can make when building in Bubble, but I think these are some good ones to be aware of to begin with. If you have any questions or you have more mistakes which you think people should be aware of, then leave them down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.